Since we are redistributing based on routes in the routing table, it is imperative that our boundary router, in this case router A, is using the routes, or else it can't redistribute them. Think about that for a second. If router A knows about the 172.16.00/16 network and it's in its OSPF database, and it knows about the 192.168.5.0/24 network, it's in its EIGRP topology table. In order for those entries to end up in the routing table, they have to be the best. There can't be any other source of information, such as a static route or another routing protocol on router A, that is training router A about those particular destination networks. Why? Well, because if it does, then those better sources of information would end up in the routing table. And our redistribution wouldn't work as we planned it to if we were redistributing from EIGRP into OSPF and OSPF into EIGRP. So it's imperative that this entry here is in router A's routing table via EIGRP. It's imperative that this entry is in the routing table on router A via OSPF. That way there, we can take those networks and we can share them between the two routing protocols. What do we call router A in the OSPF world? It's the Autonomous System Boundary Router, the ASBR. What do we call this router in the EIGRP world? The Edge Router, the Boundary Router. I don't really have a specific name like we do for OSPF, but it's that boundary router. It sits on the edge of our routing domain. And it can reach those destination networks that are outside of our routing domain. So in this case, router A would know about 192.168.5.0, would know about 172.16.00 in the routing table, and then performing redistribution, we can teach each routing domain about the routes outside of their routing domain. And we can see that accomplished here. We can see that router B knows about the 172.16.00/16 network, and specifically, it's an external network, external EIGRP network. So even though it's coming over from OSPF, notice it says it's EIGRP now. It's not an OSPF network in the EIGRP world. It's an EIGRP network. Same thing's true over here. What do we have? We have our 192.168.5.0/24 network, which is from the EIGRP domain, and it's been redistributed in the OSPF, and it's an external OSPF route. It's not an EIGRP route anymore. It's an external OSPF route. We have a dilemma on our hands now. And the dilemma we have is that we are telling the EIGRP domain about OSPF networks, yet they don't have a common way of calculating the metric. Same thing with OSPF. OSPF is learning about the EIGRP routes from the EIGRP domain, but OSPF doesn't calculate what? It doesn't calculate the metric the exact same way.